Hello, in today's video I'll be installing an Injen cold air intake on the Scion FRS, which is the same on the Toyota 86 and a Subaru BRZ. So let's get started. The first thing we need is an 8mm socket to loosen this clamp at the throttle body. Now we'll need some pliers to pull back on the clamp and the crankcase hose, or I just use my fingers. Using the same 8mm socket, you'll want to loosen the clamp on the sound tube resonator. Next we can loosen this clamp to the intake tube. Now we can disconnect this MAF sensor connector by pressing down on this tab as we pull back. We'll also want to release this guide by pressing in on the tabs on both sides. And now we can unclip the airbox. We're almost ready to remove the airbox lid, but we still gotta separate the sound tube. And it should now just slide off. To remove the rest of the airbox, we'll need to remove the 3 bolts that are holding it. For these bolts, we'll need a 10mm socket. And finally, we can remove the 3rd bolt. Now we can remove the air filter and the remainder of the airbox. Without the airbox, there's a whole lot of empty space. And we can now remove the sound tube. We'll have to remove the MAF sensor off of our old intake with a Phillips head screwdriver. We can now place it on our new intake system using the supplied screws. To tighten the screws, you can either use a 2.5mm Allen key or a hex bit socket. Now just place the MAF sensor on and make sure that it seats and install the 2 screws. Now just tighten them up snug, they don't need to be that tight. To not lose the original screws, I like to install them back on the old intake. Now we'll want to get the heat shield and install the vinyl trim all around this opening. We'll need to cut off the excess. Unfortunately, when I cut it, I didn't cut it at enough angle to come out as great as it could have. We'll need to unhook this tab to make room for a bolt that mounts the airbox. We can now set the new airbox into position. And this is how our new airbox will mount. We'll be using the new supplied hardware, which includes the 3 bolts, the washers, and the nut. For this first one, we'll use a bolt plus a washer and bolt it into position. For the second one, we'll need to get a bolt in from underneath and place a washer and a nut from up top. And now for our third bolt plus the washer. And now to tighten them. For this bolt, we'll need a 10mm socket plus a couple extensions. To tighten the second bolt, I hold the bolt head on the bottom with my 2 fingers as I tighten the nut on top. And now we just tighten this third one. And now to assemble the coupler with the 2 clamps before we install it on the engine. Just tighten the clamps enough so they don't slide around. We still gotta be able to slide them over the notches. Let's go ahead and install the coupler on the throttle body and tighten the side up against the throttle body. Now we can install the intake tube into the heat shield first and now into the throttle body coupler. Now we can grab our air filter and slide it onto the intake tube, making sure that the clamp is on the filter before install. And now we can use the 8mm socket to tighten the clamp on the filter. Next we could tighten the clamp on the coupler to the intake tube. Next comes the crankcase hose, but this does not look right. This thing should be angled towards the back, but it's not. Even with the clamp on, this thing will eventually slide off, but I got a solution to this. I'll deal with this shortly. And now to connect the MAF sensor connector. Now we can install this vinyl cap on the sound tube resonator. This vinyl cap came off a few days later, so you may want to secure it with a hose clamp. Next we can install a heat shield lid with the supplied 5 bolts. And the cover just goes on top, and there are 2 bolts on each side, and there's 1 on the back. And now we can just tighten the bolts. So finally, to fix our crankcase hose problem, we can remove this fitting off of our original intake and use a piece of 1/2 heater hose to connect to the intake tube. And now we can just attach it to our setup. We'll want to disconnect our battery for a few minutes so it can reset the fuel trims. And now finally we can start the car and try it out. Well, I hope you guys found this video helpful and informative. If you did, please click that like button to support this video and channel. And if you haven't done so, click that subscribe button and ring that bell to be notified of any future videos.